Okay, so I think the best place to start is with the update part, because certainly there's been a lot going on since we last met. First and foremost, all the missiles and, oh, Joy, you joined us. Wonderful.
I'm sorry, I forgot it was on totally, was hanging out the washing, yes. But here I am, and I want to hear your update.
Well, that's, we're just starting. Marion just opened the meeting, and now we're just starting.
Oh,
and if you like, you can close it. That would be wonderful.
Yeah,
okay. Anyway, so the big deal, of course, was what was going on over this past week, weekend in particular, with Gaza. So first of all, let me just kind of lay out for you how it started and what was going on. Okay. So last week, the Israeli army arrested one of the top leaders of the Islamic Jihad, which is a terrorist organization. Probably, put it this way, if I'm going to compare it to Hamas, I would say they're both just as bad in terms of how they feel about Israel and their ultimate goal, which is to destroy all Jews, to destroy Israel, and establish an Islamic, rule in all the Middle East. Okay, so they're really the same ideology. The only difference is that Hamas is a somewhat government, okay, in Gaza, and therefore, to some extent, they will sometimes, on rare occasion, act a little bit responsibly, because at the end of the day, they're the ones responsible for the welfare of the people of Gaza. Okay, Islamic Jihad is also in Gaza. It's a very tiny organization that has no responsibility for anything. So they just, shoot what they want, they kill when they want. And the only way to stop them is either Hamas decides to rein them in, because Hamas are the people running Gaza, or we do something for them. Okay, and that's more or less, the story. So they also have representatives, of course, in Judea and Samaria. There are, unfortunately, all kinds of Arabs in Judea and Samaria who support this most radical type of Muslim terrorist, etc. ideology. Okay, unfortunately, it's a fact we have to deal with. So what happened was, one of these fellows, who's like a top-notch fellow in Samaria, was arrested last week. Well, the powers that be in Islamic Jihad in Gaza decided this was outrageous and an affront to their honor and who knows what. And therefore, they announced that they are going to be, shooting missiles. They're going to attack, that Israel is going to be so sorry that it ever had the gall to arrest this terrible terrorist. Okay? So usually what happens when things like that happen is that Israel goes on high alert, and they move the Iron Dome to all these key places, and they wait, okay? This time, it was a completely different tactic, a tactic which the more I look at it, the more I see what happened, it's clear to me that it was all planned, okay? It was a completely different tactic, and for the first time, we saw Israel taking a really bold initiative. Thank God about time, okay? So, first of all, they said, everybody in the area around Gaza, something like within 25, 30 kilometers of Gaza, everybody shut down. We're closing the roads, please close your stores. I mean, it's no schools now anyway, but no activities with many people. Everybody stay home. Make sure you're near your shelter. And of course, of course, people agreed, abided by this rule, and the first day, there wasn't that much grumbling. After a while, there was a lot of grumbling. People have said, now, wait a second. These bullies in Gaza are threatening us, so we shut down? What kind of deal is this, okay? And then on Friday, Israel attacked. Who did it attack? The first target of the attack was actually, and you have to think how amazing Israeli intelligence is. First of all, the fact that they captured the guy from Islamic Jihad to begin with, they knew exactly where he was going to be at a particular moment, and they just swooped in and took him. Okay, so on Friday, they saw a group of Islamic Jihad people with missiles already on their shoulders, about to launch a missile, and they killed them. attacked them, took them out, which first of all is amazing because you catch this group, they're just about to attack and you catch them at that most amazing minute, okay? And then Israel started a full-blown attack against Islamic Jihad positions in Gaza. As a result, the Islamic Jihad indeed started sending missiles over to us. Now, until this time, for years already, Israel was unwilling to take the initiative and begin the attack because they were afraid of public opinion. They're afraid of, not public opinion in Israel, they're afraid of world opinion. They're afraid of condemnation in the UN, okay? So here, it was a very interesting ploy that happened because, first of all, they took the initiative, but secondly, they couched this initiative with two things going on in Israel. First of all, they basically, bumped up the level of the threat against southern Israel by putting all of Israel in shelters. So they could say, how much longer do you think our people can stay at home and we shut down Israel? So already you create a momentum, you create a certain excuse, so to speak, so that we can take the initiative. And then, of course, the initiative began with killing a group of people who were literally about to launch a missile. Okay, but they didn't stop with just killing that group. They turned this into a full-blown attack. The amazing thing, there was one attack so they took out that guy in Samaria, he was arrested. Then in the course of this attack over the weekend, and we saw this on TV, I don't know if you were able to see this, it was an amazing thing. You see this building in Gaza, I don't know, 3-4 stories high, number of apartments, and the Air Force is able to take a guided missile, the Israeli Air Force, and land this missile right into the specific apartment where this guy is. Who is that guy? Another one of the leadership of the Islamic Jihad. It's amazing when you think about it, okay? They also were showing how the Air Force is so careful. They knew a particular terrorist was in a particular place and they were zooming in on him and about to attack, and then they see some kids in the area and they wait. And they wait until the kids leave, and there's constantly checking. Then they were going to bomb houses that either had terrorists or had ammunition factories or any other part of this Islamic Jihad terrorist network. And then what they do is that they send messages. They call the telephones of all the people there, and they say, you have, a minute or 2 minutes or whatever to get out of your building because we're about to bomb it. And then we heard this. In other words, the army was very smart this time, and they recorded these things and they put it out for us to see and hear, which was great. Now, of course, I don't need to see and hear this stuff, but people around the world need to see and hear this stuff. And this is how they did it. Now, unfortunately, of course, there were all this time tremendous attacks going on by the Islamic Jihad to Israel. A total of 1,100 missiles were aimed at Israel. Of those, about 200 fell in their own territory. Notice they misfired. And as a result of those 200, a number of Palestinians were killed. Now, one point in mind, there's a place called Jabalia. It is a huge refugee camp in Gaza. And a house was hit and a whole family was killed, including children. And of course, immediately the Palestinians blame Israel. Look what they've done. Now, I've just said to you, and this was backed up by all kinds of footage, how Israel's gone out of its way to ensure that innocents are not killed. You can't always, guarantee this, but how they went out of the way. And indeed, very few, innocent bystanders were hurt in this whole thing. It was such a targeted strike. But of course, the Palestinians, completely irresponsible and just a bunch of liars, frankly, immediately go out and say, look what the Israelis did. They targeted a house with a lovely family and everybody was killed. Until Israel released the footage that showed the launching of the missile, it backfiring, the launching of the missile by the Palestinians, it backfiring and landing on the house. Absolutely full proof that this family was killed by the Palestinians themselves. Now, then I heard, this was like such amazing, if you see, all this effort that Israel does to prove to the world, okay, that we're really okay. that we're dealing with crazies who want nothing more than to kill us, and we're going out of our way to fight them, to protect our citizens in the most moral way possible. So then you have a spokesperson, I think from the United Nations, but I'm not sure, one of these spokespeople from out there somewhere, okay, who responded to this footage. First of all, you had in the United Nations, there was a discussion of, I don't remember, it was the General Security Council, one of them, and they're blaming Israel and they're condemning Israel. And our ambassador, the Israeli ambassador, Gilad Erdan to the United Nations, gets up and he shows this footage. He shows the footage of, so you can see it's clear as day that the missile is a Palestinian missile that backfired and landed on this house. Then you see the spokesperson getting up as a result of this, and she says, well, or maybe it was CNN. It could have been CNN. It wasn't a spokesperson. Yeah, it was a journalist who says, well, Israel claims that it was a Palestinian missile who hit this house. And they show footage which they claim proves that. Now I ask you, is this not ridiculous? What is this claims? You look at the footage and you see it. Why do you have to say Israel claims? Israel claims as if I just got up and said something. The Palestinians get up and say something, they have nothing to prove it. Israel gets up, shows footage that proves it, and it's still Israel claims. So I don't know. I'm very disgusted with all these people. I don't expect anything of them. United Nations, as far as I can say, can go whatever. CNO can go whatever. I don't expect anything from them, but all of this, this just goes to prove what really is going on. But anyway, what was very, very special, and I don't know special, but unique about this whole situation, okay, was that Hamas did not get involved at all. Now, Israel made it very clear that their targeting this time was Islamic Jihad, and said to Hamas, if you stay out of this, we won't bother you. And in fact, every single target was an Islamic Jihad target, and in the end, Hamas did not get involved at all. To the extent that yesterday, after the ceasefire went into effect, actually went into effect in the middle of the night, so the next morning, yesterday morning, you have all these Palestinians identifying with Islamic Jihad that are calling the Hamas traitors because they didn't join them in their fight. Okay, now, what this government did for the first time, and they claim that this was a very wise approach, and I personally am very neutral. I'm saying, let's see. It was an approach that was first initiated by Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz, okay? A completely different approach. On the one hand, what we saw under Netanyahu was, you know, there would be this blockade against Gaza of certain things or whatever, and then there was a problem with humanitarian aid. So the way Netanyahu solved that problem was Qatar would deliver suitcases of cash to people, and we're just handing out cash to individuals. And this was done under Israeli supervision. That was a very controversial thing. It's like weird, okay, and very controversial. This government stopped that altogether. They said, no more suitcases of cash. We are not in the business of making sure all these people in Gaza have cash. That's not the issue. What we are in the business of making sure they stop sending missiles. What they did do is they started some months ago to start allowing some people from Gaza, some Arabs from Gaza, who of course go through a complete security clearance, to come into Israel and work, okay? They come in through no illegal crossings there. They come in through the regular channels, they're allowed in, they work, they go back home. And what they're doing is bringing money that they are earning in Israel, which is also good for the Israeli economy because it's, you know, they're helping to build or whatever it is they're doing. Money they're earning, and they're taking it back. So instead of taking back money that are suitcases of cash from Qatar, they're taking back money that they actually earned in Israel, okay? It is thought that, and this is being done via the Egyptians under supervision of Hamas. It's a very, you know, crazy kind of situation because of course we don't talk to Hamas ever. We don't talk to them. We don't talk to Islamic Jihad, and so the thinking was that the reason Hamas did not enter this was not only because we were very careful not to attack their assets, but they realized that if they do participate, they're going to lose this ability to have people come into Israel. And in fact, as soon as this was over, and we we ended it when it was good for us to end it, and we had accomplished everything we wanted to accomplish, including basically decimating the entire leadership of the entire leadership of the Islamic Jihad. There's no more leadership anymore. In fact, one of the things that they were saying when they were talking about a ceasefire, is there anybody in Islamic Jihad that's authorized to say yes to a ceasefire, because we just killed all the leadership. That was pretty interesting. But anyway, what happened then this morning is that, given that Hamas really did stay out of this completely, so now they're looking at increasing the number of Palestinians who are going to be able to come into work in Israel. And again, this is controversial. What kind of rewards do you give, etc.? What I can say is that the Islamic Jihad is very angry, because the Egyptians said to them, we promise that we will try to convince the Israelis to release prisoners. But the Israelis never said they would release anybody, and Israel has made it very clear, we're not releasing any prisoners for Islamic Jihad or anything. So basically, the ceasefire was agreed to by Islamic Jihad without getting anything in return from Israel, other than the fact that if they stop firing, we'll stop firing after we decimated their leadership. So this was widely seen by all parts of Israel, the right, the left, the government, the opposition, everybody, as a success. And in fact, even Netanyahu praised the campaign. This is completely and totally in consensus. One thing that I have to say, when we look at exactly the success of this, of course, a major part of the success is that those missiles that came over from Gaza did not kill anybody in Israel. Did not, and the only people that were injured in Israel, the people were tripped and fell or had anxiety as they tripped and fell, or they were on their way to their shelter, or they had anxiety as a result of a missile landing very close to them. There was 96% success in shooting down the missiles. 380 missiles were actually shot down. Now, you may say, how is that 96%? Because the Iron Dome only shoots down missiles that are going to land in a populated area. If it's going to land in the sea, if it's going to land in an empty field, then they don't bother shooting it down. Okay, so they did shoot down 380, which represents 96%. There were a few missiles that landed. There was property damage, no question. And what's so amazing is that people really listened to the instructions. They went into their shelters in their homes, and there were a few people that were interviewed on television that you saw their homes. Their home was a mess, but they were in the shelter, and so they weren't damaged at all. So this is amazing. And so, of course, we're very grateful for the brilliance of the Iron Dome. We're very grateful for the IDF. But at the end of the day, we are grateful to God, because it is God who is ensuring that we have this protection. Okay. And this is just amazing. We have this protection. We have this, and I would say even further, when we look at the technology and the brilliance, okay, if we look at the fact that the intelligence that we're getting enables us to know exactly where a terrorist is and pinpoint the target, or when we look at the brilliance of the Iron Dome that has been completely created, partly funded by the United States, but completely created by Israeli know-how, our high-tech industries, our brilliant engineers, okay? So people say, oh, we're brilliant, everybody's brilliant. Who gives the brains to these people? Who gives them, I'll say even further, there's what I call the Eureka Effect, Smart people and not so smart people, you have a problem you're trying to deal with, and you're scratching your head and you're trying to figure out, how am I going to deal with this? How am I going to solve this problem? And you know how it is, all of a sudden you say, Eureka, oh my gosh, I just realized, here's the answer. Every single invention that is in Israel, at some point, somebody is scratching their heads and trying to solve a problem, and there's that Eureka moment. Who do you think provides the Eureka moment? How do you think that brilliance happens? Okay, someone has been staring at his mathematical equations for hours, for days, and he just doesn't see how he's going to figure this out, and then he figures it out. That's God. That is God. And so I think we must be so grateful for the soldiers and the intelligence and all these people who are working hard and who are risking their lives. So at the end of the day, none of this could happen without God. And we all know God neither slumbers or sleeps as he watches Israel. And that's just my 2 cents on that. Now, when all of this is happening on Sunday, which was the last day of the, all the fighting and all the attacking, that was also the 9th day of Av. Now, actually, technically, the 9th day of Av fell on Saturday this year, on Shabbat, but Shabbat is never a day of mourning. So if we're going to have a day of mourning and it falls on Shabbat, it will always be moved over to Sunday. And so as Shabbat was ending, we immediately went into the 9th of Av, which is on the biblical calendar, the day that both of the first and second temples were destroyed. And this is not just, mourning, something that happened thousands of years ago. There's so much more, there's so many more layers of this. So first of all, the mourning of the temple is seen as something that changed history, okay? And especially where we are today. Everything we are today is as a result of the destruction of the second temple. The Romans destroyed the temple. Some years later, most of the Jews from Israel were exiled to Rome. Many of them were already in Babylon from the destruction of the first temple, and more went there and joined them. And as a result of that destruction, suddenly Jews ended up all over the world. And when we talk about the diaspora, when we talk about Jews outside of Israel, living all over the world, even in Australia, even in New Zealand, in Europe, in Canada, wherever, in the United States, South America, you name it, this is as a result of the destruction of the temple, the second temple. Of course, today we're living in an amazing time where we're seeing that process being reversed, and it's miraculous. And none of our forefathers could have said that. For centuries, our ancestors have been fasting and praying and in mourning on this day, and in the days leading up. For the weeks leading up to the 9th of Av is also, we go through processes of getting more and more involved in this mourning process, and this is all as a result of this. But in addition, and it's not just that the temple was destroyed; it is that our autonomy was taken from us, and we were no longer an independent nation in our own country. Which of course now, thank God, we are once again. So there's just an amazing reversal of that. But of course, we don't yet have a temple, and that is something that we continue to look forward to, rebuilding of the temple. What does the rebuilding of the temple really mean? It means, for us, think about what Isaiah says. Okay, Isaiah says that my house will be a house of prayer for all the nations. And to us, that's what the temple represents. It's a spiritual center for all of Israel, but it's also a spiritual center for all the world. If you look at the Solomon's prayer after he dedicated his temple, when he talks about what the temple will be, he talks about how, first of all, the people in Jerusalem will look towards the temple. They will come to the temple. The people from all over the land of Israel will look towards the temple, pray towards the temple. And then he goes beyond that. He says those from around the world, those travelers, those are from wherever, even outside of Israel, will be looking in towards this temple. And that is how we see the temple as the spiritual center of Israel and ultimately of the entire world. So that, of course, we don't have. And what we need in order to have that is that first, God needs to be recognized as the spiritual center of the world. And once that happens, the building of the temple is just, the physical manifestation of that. But this is, of course, a major thing that we have to deal with, and not just to announce, yes, we believe in God, but to follow in what God wants us to be doing in the right way, to obey His word, to be kind and good people. And I just refer briefly to Zechariah. Zechariah in chapter 8 is a fascinating question that arises in his time. And in his time, what are we talking about? We're talking about the beginning of the return to the land of Israel after the destruction of the first temple. 7 years have passed, as Jeremiah said. The first temple will be destroyed, and Jeremiah says in his prophecy, in another 70 years, you'll come back. So this time has passed, and people have started to come back to the land of Israel, and they've already begun building the temple. And then a question comes. a question comes, so should we still fast? Okay, should we still be fasting on these fasts that were established to commemorate the destruction of the temple? And the initial question, okay, is basically God gives him this answer, and the answer initially that God gives is a weird one. If you think, he says, I don't know why you're asking me. He says, you're the one who don't eat and drink. You're the ones who have established this fast. Don't ask me. What do you think? What do you think you should do? And then he goes on in the prophecy, and he brings a positive twist in this whole thing. And he says there will come a time where elder men and women will be sitting in the streets of Jerusalem, and elderly people holding onto their canes, and the streets of the city will be filled with children playing in the streets. So it's such a beautiful, beautiful prophecy. And if you think about it, it's definitely something we see today. The idea that men and women would live to old age and enjoy their grandchildren in the streets of Jerusalem and throughout the land of Israel, of course, is one of the beautiful symbols of this idea of a redemption. But then he goes back to this issue in chapter 8, and he talks about it in a few different ways. So one of the things he's saying is that it's very important that it's not just a question of, are you going to fast or not? He says, but you need to remember what were the sins that brought forward the destruction of the temple, the terrible way that the rejection of God, and the way people behaved, and they were terrible to one another. And of course, that is he reminds them, he says, at the end of the day, and this is in chapter 8, he says, one day, he says, these will become holidays, okay? But what does he say? And you will love truth and peace, okay? What is the key to these days of fasting to become holidays is that the whole behavior has to change. They have to come back to God. But again, remember what Jeremiah says when they come and they bring their sacrifices. And Jeremiah says, God doesn't need your sacrifices. He needs your heart. He needs your actions, okay? And basically this is what Zechariah is saying. He says, you have to love peace and truth. You have to do the right thing, okay? And then, of course, things will be so different. And then at the end of that chapter is a verse that many of my Christian friends love to quote. There will come a time, 10 people from all the various nations will hold onto the edge of the garment of one Jew, and they will say, we will go with you because we heard that God is with you. And of course, this is our vision for our future, and we believe we're getting there. We really believe we're on that path. And if I think about it, one of the things I didn't mention until now, but it's also very critical, this day, the 9th of Av, became not only commemorating these two events, the destruction of both temples, but it turns out that so many actions of anti-Semitism, for example, the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492 during the Spanish Inquisition, that happened on the 9th of Av. And there are many other things that happen on the 9th of Av. In fact, there is a Christian friend who's written a book about this, all the different events that took place on the 9th of Av. And many of them were actually perpetrated by people who called themselves Christians. And so when I look today and I look at these wonderful changes that we're looking at, we're seeing old people celebrating in Jerusalem and in all of the land of Israel. We see children again in the streets and all these wonderful, we see the rebuilding of Jerusalem. We go and we read the prayers that were once said on the 9th of Av, and then we still say them to a certain degree, and how depressing they are about talking about Jerusalem in all its destruction. And we're kind of at a disconnect because on the one hand, we say, we're not there yet. Look at the problems we're dealing with. And this year on the 9th of Av, we could feel these problems because as we were in synagogue and reading the book of Lamentations, there's missiles raining down on us, from these terrible terrorists in Gaza. Okay, so we know we're not there yet. Believe me, we really know. that we're not there yet. And just imagine if these people in Gaza and the Arabs here in Judea and Samaria would suddenly wake up one day and say, let us hold on to the edge of the garment of a Jew and say, let us go with you because we know that God is with you. That would be the end of the story. Everybody would build the temple together. Oh my gosh. But if I look at where we are now, I'm talking to you, Christians in Australia, okay, you are studying these things. You are talking about, about about all that happened on the 9th of Av, and you're beginning to appreciate that. And at the same time, you're standing with Israel and supporting Israel and becoming part of this whole amazing partnership, a complete reversal of all that terrible Christian anti-Semitism that went before us. Well, I just think Tisha B'Av, 9th of Av, even though it is a very sad day, we have a completely different perspective on that today than we once did. I want to conclude, and I want to make sure to leave some time for you guys to ask questions, but I want to conclude with talk about a community. I always like to focus on one community, and this community is Na'aran, which is also our community of the month, this month, if any of you have seen that already. And Na'aran is a very different sort of community. Not at all like any of the other communities that we deal with, okay? So first of all, it's located in the Jordan Valley. And I don't know how many of you have been in the Jordan Valley in the summer. I don't recommend it. It is so hot, you can't imagine. It's very dry heat, but the temperatures can go up, close to 50. It's, centigrade. It is insanely hot, okay? To the extent that in the Jordan Valley, nobody is outside during the day, unless they're in the swimming pool, okay? They're inside in their air conditioning. The farmers get up before dawn to do whatever they have to do so that they're finished by 8 or 9 in the morning, and then they go inside, and then they go back out again in the evening, okay? It's just unbearable heat. And today, everybody has air conditioners, but when the people first settled in the Jordan Valley, there were no air conditioners. And every time I think of that, and I think of the amazing, and there was not only no air conditioners, no agriculture, there was no water. Everything you see there today, they have amazing agriculture today. It's all irrigation, it's pumping, it's finding underground springs of water that were always there. But the Arabs, there were no Arabs in the Jordan Valley because it was considered such a barren place. Who could live there? Okay, and they came shortly after the 67 war, and they started to settle there. So Na'aran, though, is interesting. This is a community that first began in 1977. Okay, and it was kind of a motley group of people. It was a kibbutz of sorts, and it wasn't that successful. And by 1990, just about everybody of the original group had left, okay? And it was empty. I remember going there at one point. It was very depressing. It was very empty. They had these old buildings there, old homes, but nobody was there. And then in 1999, 10 young people, men and women, decided, let us try this again. Now, who were these people? And that's what makes this so interesting. Very secular people who wanted to establish a kibbutz, a real kibbutz. Now, you need to know that in Israel, kibbutz is very changed from what it used to be, but typically the kibbutz movement was a very secular movement based on very, very, very good ideals. Okay, this was not communism. This was socialism in its purest form, a voluntary association of people who want to be sure that everybody is looked after. So everybody worked together in the fields, in the agriculture, whatever. They pooled the resources, and then everybody got what they needed, whether it was food or clothing for the children or whatever, elderly. Very, very nice. Now, over time, that model stopped working, okay? But the ideology remained. Now, because the ideology was so lofty in so many ways and very attractive to people, there's also religious kibbutz movement. Now, religious kibbutz movement is very different because the synagogue is the center of that type of community. You have the same idea of pooling the resources, looking out for one another, but it's very much based on biblical values and the synagogue in the middle. This group of people were very secular. They were looking at the original kibbutz model, but it was already a little bit going out of style, this original ideology, okay? And they decided to renew it. And they came, and they were all members of the youth movement and very, very Zionist. And I know many Christians have trouble wrapping their head around how can you be so Zionist and at the same time very secular. But remember that for people who are secular, Israel is our national homeland. It's a tremendous sense of patriotism. It is ours. They will say, yes, it was ours from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because they believe that this is our history. Okay, this is our history. And so it was very important for them to come back and settle the land. So they started with 10 adults. Today, there are 80 adults, they're mostly married, okay, and 60 children. So what started as this amazing adventure with people coming out, and when times were very, very difficult and very hot, and there was really nothing there, today they've come back and they set up a seminar center where they're teaching secular people values, to love the land of Israel, to love the people of Israel, to stand in solidarity with one another, which are really, really very fine goals, of course. And they've built something very interesting. Now, what's interesting about this, they first came to us, they were very hesitant, okay? This was recently, they were very hesitant. And they said, we're very secular. Are you still gonna be interested in supporting us? I said, why not? Why not? Look what you're doing. You might not realize, but you are doing holy work. The work you do, God loves. You don't have to believe in him if you don't want to. I don't care, but I'm telling you, you're doing holy work. And they were like, oh, I said, not a problem. And we started raising money for them recently because they have a desperate need for security equipment. And we just raised the first small amount of money and handed it to them. They were like over the moon. They couldn't believe it. And I didn't give them that much money. I gave them towards their project. Now we're starting to raise more money for them, but they were so overwhelmed. And it was just an amazing sense that we sometimes, the religious, the right wing, sometimes we feel, I don't know, the media's against us and everyone's against us. And here the tables have been turned. Very secular people sitting in the middle of the settlement movement, okay? And wondering, are they going to be accepted by the rest of the settlement movement? And I was able to say, of course you're accepted. Everybody is welcome. Everybody is loved. And especially we're in this together to build up this land of Israel and to protect the people. And it was just an amazing, amazing encounter. So I think this is actually a really important opportunity for them to understand that there are people like you out there all over the world who love them because you believe they're doing God's work, even though they're not quite sure if they're doing God's work, but they do know that they're doing important work for the nation of Israel. And and I'm going to end with this. I just want to bring in one little thought when I think about Nahran, a little thought that I gained from the Bible on all of this. You might recall in the book of Joshua, it starts already at the end of Moses' life, but it's mostly fleshed out in the book of Joshua. When the nation of Israel has entered the land, there's a little bit of a tension there between 2.5 tribes that are going to end up staying on the eastern side of the Jordan and all the rest that are going to move into the western side. And initially, of course, Moses insists that they come and join, not just join the fight, but lead the fight. And they do. When they first come just before they come into the land, when they're sitting there just opposite Jericho and they're about to cross, and Joshua says to them in the very first chapter, he says, now, don't you forget, you swore to Moses that you're going to be coming with us and leading the fight. And they, of course, assure him that they will do that. Then we have a little story that starts out in chapter 22. After everybody is settled and everybody has gone to their particular territories in the 2.5 tribes, after the wars are over, the 2.5 tribes go back east and they settle. And there's a departure there that happens. And again, they pledge their solidarity and their commitment to being part of the nation. And then what happens? They put up, it turns out the people on the western side of the Jordan find out that they've put some kind of a monument up there on their eastern side facing the Jordan. And they're concerned, oh my goodness, are they setting up an altar? Are they going to start competing with the tabernacle in Shiloh? And they send a delegation to find out what is this all about. But this delegation they're assuming that it's bad and they're already thinking about, are we going to have civil war? And of course, civil war is diffused because at the end, these 2.5 tribes say, don't worry, we are not building an alternative. We are putting up a monument that will help us gear our attention to the tabernacle in Shiloh and to the rest of the nation, that it's the rest of Israel. And of course, there's a very, very important message here. and that is a message of the importance of unity, okay? Very often there will be fissures, there'll be dividing lines between us within the nation of Israel, but we have to do whatever it takes to preserve unity. And of course, whenever there's a crisis, and we saw that now with Gaza, whenever there's a crisis, it's very easy for the nation to come together and be in unity, as we saw over this time. And of course, we saw that as well in Joshua. When the actual fighting was going on, everybody, of course, came together and fought together. The challenge is when the fight is over, can you then preserve your unity? And clearly that's the message that comes out of this little story in chapter 22, how important it is to keep that unity, even if you have something that divides you, in that case, the Jordan River. If I look just on the other side of the Jordan River to where Na'aran is, I say, this is a representation of everything we're dealing in Israel. We have people who believe in God and who are very religious, and people who don't. And we have people who are right, and we have people who are left. And we have people who think kibbutz is great, and we have people who think kibbutz is terrible. And, you know, all kinds of ideas. But what's important is that we stand together. We stand together to preserve the land of Israel. We would like everyone to stand together in faith, no question. But even if we can't stand together in that, the unity of the nation is very important. I just feel like in our relationship that we're building with the community in Naharain, this is part of what we're doing. And it's located right there, almost in the same place where this whole division happened in Joshua chapter 22. So that's all I have to say today. I talked a long time, but this is your opportunity to make comments, turn on your mics, whatever. I'd love to hear from you. And of course, questions.
Verse 34, the sons of Reuben, the sons of Gad, called the altar witness, for they said, it is a witness between us that the Lord is God. What a way to finish a chapter.
Yes, yes, it is wonderful.
The Lord is God.
And that's what we hope we'll get to. We get to
Absolutely.
A point where that's where everybody will be joined in the witness of God, 100%.
Fabulous. That really is. Thank you. A great lesson.
Thank you, Rex. Thank you.
Wonderful.
John did ask a question on chat, Sondra.
Yes.
I sort of did answer him a tad, but it might be worth mentioning the nation's 9th of Av event that's just happened here in Jerusalem, and we have a gala dinner tonight.
Which I'm going to be at.
Yes, me too.
Love to be there.
Who is this Orthodox rabbi's webinar that you were referring to, John?
John, you need to unmute.
Gotcha.
Unmute.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
Perfect. Yes.
Yes.
Who is
No,
this
I've been
rabbi?
involved with this webinar for a couple of years. There is a small group of Christians on that webinar. I'm the sort of leader of them. I'm also the rabbi's, as it were, secretary, you might call me, in keeping him in touch with what's going on. But I wouldn't tell you who it is. That wouldn't be fair to him or to me or to all my other friends.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. No, look, I think that for many years, this was how we were. I must say, I grew up in the United States, okay? And I grew up, my parents, my father was born in the United States, and my mother came as a child. Both of them, their parents, okay, were victims of anti-Semitism. My mother's family, as she was a child, ran before Hitler got to their area and got out in time. And my father's mother escaped from a pogrom, years earlier, it's a different generation, in 1920 in the Ukraine. So growing up in America, though, already my parents were able to appreciate the fact that the Christians that they were dealing with in America were not the same Christians that had done those horrific things in Eastern Europe. So the way I was raised was very much to be aware of Christian anti-Semitism and how terrible it was, to appreciate and understand it. But the other hand, when you meet a Christian on the street in Cleveland, Ohio, to take them as they are, face level, they may be anti-Semites, but they may not, okay? And that's how I was raised. But you have people that were raised in families or themselves experience direct anti-Semitism, so it's much more difficult. I think what I have been blessed is to be able to be directly involved for many years already in this complete change that is happening. And as you all know, it's not everybody in Christianity. There are still plenty of anti-Semites who call themselves Christians.
Yes, there are.
And this is a huge
But it comes
challenge.
from bad teaching.
Yeah, bad teaching. And I'll tell you
garbage.
something else. I encounter Christians who are good people who would never consider themselves anti-Semitic at all. They're not. However, every so often they'll make a comment that indicates to me that they don't even realize that the comment they're making is rooted in anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work.
Sondra, that's very true. And the problem is that Christians like myself, what I call a nonconformist Christian, I want to build bridges with Jewish people. Not that I want to convert them, although I do believe in Jesus as Messiah. Of course I do. But I want to get to know them, to understand them, and to compare notes with them. But mainly it's for friendship. And it makes me sad when I do encounter Jewish people who remember all the horrible things that happened. And so they have a stereotype idea of what a Christian is. And as in Judaism, not every Jew is observant. Same in Christianity. There's lots and lots of people in what we call a Christian world who are not really Christians.
Definitely not. No. I've been an Israeli supporter since I was 6 years of age in a Christian church. But that's the way I was taught, that they're fabulous people. They're God's chosen. But so many churches have been teaching garbage. That's where it's coming from. Yeah.
Replacement theology, all that stuff.
The problem in the church is that it's not just individuals who are not doing what the pastors or the priests are telling them. Okay. You have whole churches and whole institutions where the teaching itself is anti-Semitic. And so there the challenge is far more difficult, because you will say to these people, that is not Christianity. And they will say to you, you're not Christianity. And that's a debate that Jews cannot get involved in at all. It's not, it's between Christians. But that's really the biggest challenge for people like yourselves to be able to convince these people that their teaching is not based in what should be authentic Christian doctrine. Because they're listening to the pastor and not reading the Bible. They go to church, they sit, they listen, they have a cup of tea, go home. What a waste of time. Heavens.
You see, on the other hand, the webinar I'm involved in, we get about 160 people.
Wow.
And the rabbi teaches what I call rabbinic Judaism, right? Now, I struggle with that. I'm a very practical person. I don't get into the midrashim and all that stuff. I accept the scripture. But through this webinar, I've met some lovely people and struck up friendships with them. And we talk about politics, we talk about humor, all sorts of things. And this is what I would love to see more Christians reaching out to Jewish people just to get to know them as people.
Yes.
I'll tell you what, I would like to encourage you. Now, the timing is not good for Australia, but we do have the recordings. I teach a weekly class that's a Bible class. Right now, we're working our way through the book of Judges. And really, take a look on our website. You go to the homepage, CFOIC.com, and I'll send you out an email with these links as well. And you go to the Bible study. And so you'll see it there. And what I'm doing is I'm bringing a Jewish approach to Bible, but it's done in such a way that, because I know where Christians are coming from.
I see that.
It's coming, it's not, see what this rabbi is doing, he's teaching to Jews, so he's not explaining necessarily how the midrash relates to the text. Okay, we don't see it as replacing or adding to the text as being another Bible, another volume of the Bible. Not at all. It's an interpretive vehicle and reflects traditions that involve interpretation. So this is something that I think people who are trying to figure out what is the connection between the way Jews teach or study Bible and the way Christians teach Bible, I would encourage you to perhaps listen to some of my talks, because that's the kind of stuff I'm doing to some degree.
Good.
Yeah,
very good.
I belong to First Fruits of Zion, and we, they're Messianic Jews, but they concentrate on what Judaism really is, what the scriptures say.
Right.
Been a great learning lesson. Yeah, been in it a few years now. Fantastic.
There is a lot also to be gained for Christians from the writings of Judaism and rabbis, just as Christians read loads of books written by supposed Christian authors that aren't Christians at all. As we've just established, there's Christians and Christians, there's pew warmers and Bible readers.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and there's Jews and Jews.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's people and there's people.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
Yes. Well, let's kill that conversation.
It's good. It's good. This is wonderful. Thank you for your input.
Sondra, just wondering if you've heard of Christian nationalism that's risen in America. It hasn't got here to Australia, but it's quite dominant in America, where they blame Christians for just about everything to put down Donald Trump's rise to power again next year. So they saw in 2016 that all the Christians came out of the woodwork and voted for him, and they think, oh, this Christian, now they're referring to every Christian, are you a Christian nationalist? And trying to stop and embarrass a Christian so they won't vote for him again in the next election coming up. So have you heard anything about that?
I've never heard the term Christian nationalism, but I'm very aware of what is going on in the States with regard to the lining up of many Christians with Trump. And there's some issues there, because on the one hand, Trump had amazing good policies for Israel and had some very good economic policies as well. On the other hand, Trump, I don't think anybody could safely and honestly say Trump is a good Christian. Okay.
No,
his personal life is
but
quite
we want a good
problematic.
Leader. It doesn't have to be
so
a Christian.
I think there needs to be a point at which Christians in America are able to say, I like this about Trump, but but it has nothing to do with Christianity. Okay, maybe it has something to do with Christianity because this or that thing that he did lines up with Christian values. But you have to leave a place for people who don't like Trump to feel that they can also be good Christians or love Israel. And it's become very heated in America, as so much politics is all over the place. And I think it's very sad, but it's creating a lot of tensions that don't need to be there. And of course, on the other side, these people who are anti-Trump go accusing people who are supportive of Trump of all the worst things in the world. And that's just ridiculous. They may be pro-Trump because they liked his policies, which I did too. That doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you vulgar or any of the other things. That it's going. So Trump is a real problem, and I would like to see Christianity kind of separate itself from Trump, and not, of course, Christians who support Trump, that's great, but not tie it with Christianity, because you don't want to polarize Christianity.
We just recently got rid of a prime minister that claimed he was a full-blown Christian, but some of the policies and how he didn't support Christianity and abortion and everything else was just atrocious. In my book, he was one of the worst prime ministers we've ever had. Yet he went to church and professed to be Christian.
Exactly.
But he was a crook.
The people who supported the prime minister, they weren't all supporting him as a Christian. He had so many people against him that he was trying to juggle them. And you can't do a decent job if not everybody's on your side. Right. There were people, the former Prime Minister, Christian, but there were people in his own party trying to tear him down. And juggling that was his biggest problem.
Our politics has really gone into the gutter. And same in the United States. And probably heading that way in Israel, but most democratic countries are headed that way.
Yes.
Okay.
I think. Oh, sorry. Just talking. Who was that talking? Sorry.
It was me, probably. I just had a phone call. But if there's no more questions, it's probably time to be closing off, isn't it, Sondra?
Yeah.
Did anyone have any more questions?
Yeah, just one last one. I've heard only one report on Telegram that Israel has developed their laser weaponry to be operated from a couple of planes that will replace the Iron Dome. Is that being heard over there?
Yes, definitely. It has been tested. It has been successful. It has not been operational yet. It was not used in this past campaign. I don't know why. Maybe for whatever reasons. I'm sure they're not going to tell me or you or anybody why. I can say that this technology, the laser technology, has been developed by Elbit, which is a huge company in Israel that my husband works for.
Hey.
But although he has nothing to do with any of the weapons, he's involved in operations of the company. But anyway, no, it is definitely a source of pride that we have developed this technology, but it has not yet gone operational.
Great.
We need it in future.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure it will start at some point.
Sondra, you're going to be at George's place in a little while, aren't you?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's what we mentioned that before you connected.
Oh, right.
Joy.
Yes.
Okay. And I'm looking forward to it.
We've got a room specially for you. For the
Thank you. Yes.
We'll send
looking forward to all of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Brilliant
Well,
session.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you again,
thank you,
Sondra, for
Thanks,
a really
Sondra.
comprehensive report. But I feel like thanking Hashem as well. Can I? Does anyone mind if I pray?
No,
Lord, just thank you. Thank you
Yes.
for your amazing protection of Israel.
Yes, Father.
Over these last few days, Lord. As they also were at their most saddest day in history, but how wonderful, Father, that they had success in a physical war, and how wonderful, Lord, that Jews and Christians are just dialoguing again after thousands of years of separation and hostilities, Lord. We just thank you and praise you for what you're doing in this hour, and that we can be part of it. We thank you, Father.
Thank
Bless
you.
Lord. Okay.
Amen.
Thank you, everybody. Good to see you. See you
Amen.
again next month.
Yes,
Bye. Good to see you.
God bless.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed that video, and we'd like to be sure you're getting all of our video content. So just click on the subscribe button below, as well as on the notification bell, and that way you will have easy access to all our material. We look forward to staying in touch with you. God bless you, and have a wonderful day.